Welcome to Forbidden Knowledge. This is a new video series dedicated to Arkham Horror, the card game. I know, another one. There are so many already, and I listened to or watched nearly all of them, or at least all that I am aware of. Great work, guys. Thank you for all the joy and insight you brought to me in the last couple of years. So, why another one? Because I seem to have a different perspective on this game or at gaming in general. I enjoy playing that game, kind of, but optimizing my deck or playstyle is not too fascinating to me. What does fascinate me are game mechanics. Since I was a kid, I was taking apart my games and inventing new ones. But it's not just components, mechanics, or rules, it's the atmosphere and story created by those. And Arkham Horror, the card game, is unbelievably good at doing so. I thought about doing something like this, or maybe a blog, for quite a while now. But I had two concerns. First, is there an audience at all? Second, should I do it? Also in English, which is obviously not my mother's tongue. Sorry for all the mistakes in my German accent. But lately I figured out to answer those two concerns, I should just try. That is why I am doing this right now. Is there an audience? Should I do it? Let's find out. Welcome to Forbidden Knowledge, a new video series about the game design of Arkham Horror, the card game, wherein I try to analyze the mechanics of individual scenarios. This is the first episode featuring the first scenario, The Gathering. And here comes the third concern. Should I start with the core set? The idea bored me. And if it bored me, how about you? Who wants to hear something about The Gathering? But then I decided it's a good idea to start with some chores and figure out the basics of this game before looking at more complicated cases. And let me say something in anticipation. Preparing the first 3 episodes brought me indeed not only to a deeper understanding of their structure, but also to a new affection to these sometimes a little unpolished gems. It should be obvious, this video series is full of spoilers, just in case somebody hasn't played the core set yet and is still interested in this video, which would be a little awkward, but hey, I don't judge you. You are about to get spoilers, okay? No further ado, let's get started. In this episode, I will present you my concept of visualizing the structure of a scenario by the means of its act and agenda decks. Then we take a closer look at the map and how it functions as a guideline through the tutorial, because that's what The Gathering is, a tutorial. I will compare that to the Return to the Gathering and conclude by maybe answering the question, which resolution is the best? I tried to find a way to visualize the overall structure of a scenario by breaking down the act and agenda decks. The result I am going to present now is itself at least the third iteration of that visualization and might not be the last, as it is definitely not perfect. I started with a simple grid. The x-axis stands for the dimension of time, or closer to the rules of Arkham Horror LCG, the amount of doom. Doom itself is a quite varying resource. Sometimes it's the growth of a cult or an ancient one. Sometimes it's just information like in Echoes of the Past. Sometimes it's more like an overshadowing curse. But the general rule to place one doom in every mythos phase brings it closer to a concept of time ticking away steadily. But we don't need to elaborate this right away. Let's say the x-axis represents the different steps of the agenda. Independently of what that agenda might be in a given case, there will be barriers to overcome and requirements to meet. Time will be in most cases one of those requirements. I am pointing to time because time opens up frame or window for the investigators to act, or rather react, like until your house collapses, or until midnight, or until a demon god will awake and feast on Arkham. My idea is that the investigators have no influence on the x-axis at all, but on the y-axis. This represents the progress of your investigation. Investigation might be an euphemism because it could even mean the amount of killed people or how far you could progress through a chaotic train. Although the players may be called investigators, the different acts and their objectives are not always focused on just investigating, and you will learn this in the very first scenario. But let's look a little closer on that grid before we come to that. Each square in the first column and row stands for one of the acts or agendas respectively. Within that square, everything what happens in that act or agenda should be represented. But I am, at least in this episode, more interested in the borders of those squares, representing the objectives to overcome, respectively, the doom threshold. I will go through the acts first. That first green circle has no true meaning other than you start here. But you could understand it as the barrier between setup and prologue and the actual game session. The second circle, which is the barrier or objective to advance from Act 1 to Act 2, has a requirement, namely find 2 clues per investigator. The arrow is the representation of doing so. That doesn't show you anything about gameplay, different ways of doing so, tactics, or those scary encounters, just that the investigators are trying to find the clues to meet the objective. Act 2 is structurally pretty much the same. The difference will be on another level we talk about later. Now it's just find 3 clues per investigator and some little restrictions where and when to advance. The third act is different though. It offers a choice. Your main objective is to kill a specific enemy. There are still clues to find, but they don't matter anymore for the progress of your investigation. If you can kill that enemy, the scenario ends and you go to a resolution. Well, actually you are given another choice between 2 resolutions. But let's look at another way to end that scenario first. During Act 3, there is also the possibility to resign from that scenario without killing that enemy. Not meeting your main objective might feel like losing, and maybe it is, but the game doesn't give you win or lose right away. In both cases, you just end the scenario and read 1 of 3 resolutions. None of those is a win or lose, it's progress within a success range. I guess we can all agree killing that enemy might be the desired and even most optimal way to end the scenario, but it's by no means the only way. Just imagine playing a Zelda game and not killing the boss of a dungeon, but just looting the special treasure. Or maybe sneaking past that boss to rescue some damsel in distress. But of course, other video games offer such possibilities. I just wanted to point out that Arkham Horror LCG gives us the widest success range in its very first scenario. 2 more comments on the representation of that in my graph. First, there is a red border around resolution 0. This indicates that you get the same resolution by losing all your health or sanity while playing the scenario, thus meeting no objective at all. That moves the connotation even closer to losing this scenario, but still, it isn't losing. Second, both the resign action and the progress arrows are on the x-axis. That might be a flaw of my sketch. Technically, you do have no progress if you stop investigating, but it also doesn't pile up any doom by itself. But before thinking too hard on that, let's have a look at the agendas. They are as linear as the first 2 acts are. They will advance after 3, 7, and 10 doom, which equals the same number of game rounds. I know there is a little special rule during Agenda 3, and the Ancient Evils encounter set, which puts extra doom in the agenda at random times, is part of the encounter deck. This whole deck consists of 26 cards. 3 of those are Ancient Evils. In a 1-player game, you should statistically hit 2 of those. one in the time frame of the first two agendas, one during Agenda 3. In a two-player game you will see all three at least once, one or two a second time after reshuffling the encounter deck, and so on. While this definitely tightens the time frame of the agendas, it doesn't mess with the structure at all. And this structure is absolutely linear. Advancing each agenda gives you a penalty. At the first, you lose some cards or sanity. After the seconds, you get confronted by an enemy, and after the third, you get the same resolution as for resigning or losing all of your health and sanity. Again, the arrows change their direction, which might be a little confusing at first. So, after all, is Resolution 0 losing that scenario, or at least the worst option of ending it? No, because there is one more resolution. Like the last Act card giving you 2 resolutions by choice, the last Agenda card gives you 2 resolutions by circumstances. Let's clean this sketch a little bit up to talk about those. The last Agenda card asks you how far your progress of investigation is when it advances. If you are already at Act 3, you get Resolution 0. But if you are still at Act 1 or 2, you get Resolution 3, which is definitely the worst resolution, as it kills the investigators and asks the players to choose different ones for the second scenario. As the core set only had 5 investigators in total, there was also the possibility to lose the whole campaign because there weren't enough spare investigators while playing with 3 or 4 players. Looking at the graph, I wanted to demonstrate the interdependencies between the acts and agendas. It shows that Resolution 3 can only occur after Agenda 3 and during the first 2 acts. Resolution 1 and 2 don't care for agendas at all, but are achieved by advancing Act 3. Resolution 0 is a little more complicated. If we ignore the red border, it can only occur during Act 3, either by resigning in any given agenda or through advancing Agenda 3. The red border opens up the possibilities to reach it before that. And looking at the story implications, this is not only structurally, but also narratively a mistake. Going unconscious or insane while being trapped in a house full of ghouls which is going to collapse should kill you, which is Resolution 3, and not put you in the same place as those investigators who managed to escape the trap, which is Resolution 0. But I guess this mistake is no mistake at all. It's a more gracious design choice. The Gathering is not only the first scenario of Arkham Horror, it's its tutorial. This shows in its nearly absolute linear structure, which offers just one little decision during actual gameplay in Act 3, and then opening up its narrative as a sex range not until the resolutions, which is after gameplay. This rigid structure of a tutorial mission transcends into another layer or perspective of each scenario, which is its map, represented through different cards. You start your game with just one location in play. There is no other location or even any way out of this location. And this odd circumstance is the premise of Act 1. The door to your study has vanished. You have to find a way out. So you start looking for clues, where your door might be gone or another way could be found. Clues in this act are not clues per se, they are the activity of searching. You look behind the curtains, into your closet and under the rug, where you find the door on the floor. Isn't it funny that lost things are always there where you are looking for them last? Advancing Act 1 puts you into your hallway, which has some doors to other locations, but as you jump through the ceiling you can't go back to your study, which is removed from the game. This has 2 benefits: limiting your movement options to keep you on track, this is still a tutorial, and avoiding the need of confronting new players with a symbol that should connect to another location, which isn't there yet, and though the symbol doesn't do anything but confusing you. Act 2 teaches you about those symbols and even that they not always mean that you can go to a specific location, as one of them is still inaccessible through game text. So, structure, objective, and narrative of Act 1 and 2 are pretty much the same. Find a way to get out of here. This time, you have some choice of where to go, and you don't need to find all the clues, which are 4 per investigator, evenly split at the 2 connecting locations. But those numbers ensure that you need to go to both of them, which gives you the first real opportunity to think about strategy. Which location first? Or should we split up? And should we keep on looking for clues even after we figured out how to escape? After playing Arkham Files games for many years, I just accepted clues as a necessary but rather unspecific resource. But this act is a masterpiece in storytelling by showing you what those clues are. You use a barrel found in the attic to transport some ice from your awkwardly frozen cellar and throw it at this magical barrier trapping you inside your house. And that works luckily. This is only one of 2 reasons for the restrictions within the objective. You need to be in the hallway narratively to break down the barrier. The other restriction is that you have to do this at the end of a round, which is another trick of the tutorial to show the player something and give them time to react. After advancing, a scary and strong enemy appears, but the players have a whole turn to react to this, thanks to the restriction. Otherwise, they would probably advance within their investigator phase, which could result in an immediate attack by this enemy. But not just the enemy appears when advancing, so does a possible ally, Lita Chandler. And this is the conclusion of the tutorial by leaving the narrow path and opening up both the choices on the act card and on the map. Should you try to kill the Ghoul Priest or resign? Or trying to parley with Lita Chandler? Splitting up, staying together, it's up to you. The Gathering gives you the opportunity for your first big victory by killing that Ghoul Priest, but without demanding that kill. And it's also fine to run from that place. Be proud that you managed to escape. Let's resume. In Act 1, players learn how to investigate a location and about shroud values, and how to advance to the next act. There is more to learn, like playing cards, facing encounters, or even fight enemies, but let's stick to those obligatory lessons. Act 2 shows you how to move between different locations and already that there might be restrictions. You should realize that your actions or overall strategy has consequences, like falling down the slippery stairs into your cellar. You also learn that finding clues is not the only aspect of advancing within this game like in the first act. And you might realize that restrictions are sometimes just a guiding hand, showing you the phases of the game and that timing those is crucial. At least now you learn how to deal with an enemy rather by fighting or evading, and this act showcases the possible choices in gameplay and is a lot closer to later scenarios than the first 2 acts. And then there is an optional lesson. You can die in this game. So The Gathering is a mostly linear and very restrictive scenario. It was fun the first time. Playing it a second or third time to figure out the game was fine, I guess, but after that it was so boring. Imagine returning to a tutorial mission in a video game over and over again. But we did return. 2 years later, after 3 whole and proper campaigns, we got an expansion to the core game, Return to the Night of the Zealot. The idea behind this expansion type is to alter the scenarios just by adding or interchanging some cards. Sometimes to make them harder, of course, but ultimately to make them more fun, either by variation or by addressing certain design flaws. Being a tutorial is not a flaw, but nevertheless rather unattractive in the long run. That is why The Gathering got a lot of new content and hopefully more fun out of that. Interesting enough, the linear structure of the act and agenda cards haven't been addressed at all, but rather the structure of the map. First of all, we get a new study. And as you clearly can see, there is an open door, so it leads to a hallway and some rooms right from the start of the scenario. But narratively, this section is still somehow disconnected to the rest of your house. The way out is just harder to find, which results in more clues to search for. After finding enough clues and advancing, you find yourself facing the same barrier and looking for a way to break it down. Acts 2 and 3 are the same as before. But there are some differences. One is that you now can go back to the rooms you already searched through. And backtracking might be necessary, or at least rational, as enemies might appear in those rooms. Talking about enemies, there is another huge difference between the original version and this version. In the original, there are 2 enemies that spawn specifically in the cellar or attic, but those locations aren't there during Act 1. So you were most lucky drawing those enemies early in the game, because they wouldn't spawn at all. Return to the Gathering adds the rule of putting those locations into play after drawing such an enemy, which results in it lurking for you until you come into its domain. And then there is one last change. Your cellar and your attic got a second copy of themselves, and you choose one at random while set up. This adds a little variation, but also makes your house potentially bigger, as both new versions lead to absolutely new otherworldly locations, transforming your house into a place that is no home anymore. So the changes are mostly regarding the map and the encounter deck we haven't talked about much, but this affects the agendas and their doom threshold too. Remember? Ignoring Ancient Evil's encounter cards, you got up to 20 rounds to escape your house. This is still true, but with the new map layout, you need a whole lot more move actions to cover all this ground. Act 1 in The Gathering doesn't ask for any move action to complete and puts you into the hallway automatically. In the Return to version, a single player needs 6 move actions to go to all the rooms and to the hallway. This is 2 full rounds. Even 2 players splitting up do need 8 move actions, each one still losing more than a whole turn. Same is true for the new locations above the attic and beneath the cellar. You might not need to go to all those places to finish the scenario, but if you try to get a lot of victory points, which translate into experience to upgrade your investigators, you have to cover a whole lot of ground and possibly even have to backtrack to kill a nasty ghoul in your bathroom. To achieve that, you need to have a pretty efficient game style or a very good deck. This puts Return to the Gathering into a sweet spot between a tutorial and a challenge for more experienced players. It's not a lot harder than the original version. It's just harder to play it in the most optimal way. Besides victory points, what exactly is the optimal way? Your main objective after breaking down the barrier is to kill the ghoul priest. After that, Lita urges you to burn down your house to kill the remaining ghouls. If you obey, you will team up with Lita, but your house is gone for good. Well, it never was much of a home, was it? Of course it was. You would never burn down your home. Could you imagine the mental trauma of doing so? Keeping your house intact results in Lita turning her back on you. Which option is better? Hard to tell. But what happens if you don't manage to kill the ghoul priest? Finally, in this case, Lita teams up with you without demanding to sacrifice your house, which makes not a lot of sense within the narrative, but from a gameplay perspective it does. Teaming up with Lita and saving your house are both beneficial for you. The ghoul priest being alive is harmful for future scenarios, which is compensated by giving you not one of 2 rewards, but both. This is actually a partially negative feedback loop, giving you some kind of better position for performing worse. but as it is combined with a positive feedback loop, killing the ghoul priest is good, not killing is bad, it doesn't feel counterintuitive, but rather fair. Looking at the outcomes might suggest that resolution 0, the one you are most probably going to reach even through advancing the last agenda, is actually the best. You get both rewards and fight that ghoul priest just at another time. We will look at the ghoul priest's interference in later scenarios in the following episodes, but thinking of resolution 0 as the best is not as absurd as it seems at first glance. Finally, there is resolution 3, which kills your investigators. Besides that little detail and the loss of experience points, it's pretty much the same as resolution 0, the consequences just apply to a new group of investigators. All those variables, leader, the ghoul priest, and your house, are represented through specific cards. Leader is a playing card, which is added to an investigator's deck. The ghoul priest is an enemy, and if alive, he might come back in the following scenarios. And your house? Your house is a location card, but from the second scenario, the Midnight Masks, which we will look at in the next episode of Forbidden Knowledge. Hey, we did it! Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this perspective on Arkham Horror the card game, and I would be very glad to get some feedback on my two concerns. Is there an audience? And should I continue with this project? Well, actually, I already continued, as there are 2 more episodes in Season 1. So thank you again, and hopefully see you next time on Forbidden Knowledge.